Yeah, I told you. All right. Facebook. Here they come. Nope, I don't want to do immersive. Good evening, everybody. Let you all make your way in, and
Okay,
kind of like in a classroom when you come in and you find your most comfortable seat and you're looking around to see who else is in there.
Here it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So everybody, please make sure that you're muted. I will back that up here in just a second.
I forgot to ask if Daz won his game tonight.
That's the author of the book.
Yeah, that is. You see?
Oh,
You're not muted.
Everybody, please make sure you're muted. There we go. I got mute all. There we go. Okay. There we go. Had a hard time finding that button. You would think that after 2 years of Zoom, we would remember where these things are. But no. So anyhow. All right. Well, it is a little bit after 7 o'clock on Monday, January 31st. Thank you all for joining this evening. My name is Brad Lyons. You are in the live stream for Ferguson, Faith After Ferguson. What changed and what remains the same? I'm Brad Lyons. I'm the president and publisher here at Chalice Press. Chalice Press is the publishing house of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, but our work just extends far beyond serving one denomination. We are very proud to have published many books that have a variety of approaches to the same shared goal of eliminating racism in our society. And one of our most recognizable books has been Ferguson and Faith, Sparking Leadership and Awakening Community by Dr. Leah Gunning Francis. I had the pleasure of getting to know Leah, who was a professor at Eden Theological Seminary here in St. Louis, as she worked on Ferguson and Faith. Her first book shared the stories of activists on the front lines in the protest in Ferguson, Missouri, following the killing of Michael Brown, a young Black man, by a white police officer. Since publishing that book, Leah has become a well-known speaker on the topic of racial justice and the dean at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. We were blessed when Leah agreed to write a follow-up book, checking in on those leaders and introducing several others, and that is Faith After Ferguson, Resilient Leadership in Pursuit of Racial Justice. That was published by Chalice Press last fall. Actions have consequences, and Leah has dug into how those people's lives have changed and not changed in the half dozen years since the Ferguson protests. We're grateful for what Leah has done, and I always come away from a conversation with her with a better understanding of how I can work as an individual to help in the battle to dismantle racism in our culture. The panel she's assembled for tonight's conversation has the potential to multiply that wisdom exponentially. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way. And it's my honor to introduce Dr. Leah Gunning Francis, who will in turn introduce tonight's panelists. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you so much, Brad, and many thanks to Chalice Press for all the wonderful support of this project. Good evening, everyone. It is so good to see you this evening, and for those that are joining through other streams, I pray that you are doing well and staying warm if you're in a cold climate like I am right now and my friends in St. Louis. As Brad has said, my name is Leah Gunning Francis, and it is truly my honor and my privilege and pleasure to be with you this evening and to have three friends and colleagues with us tonight who are also going to share in this conversation. But before I introduce them, I want to just give just a little bit more background about this project, because it is one that is so near and dear to many of our hearts, because we know that at the crux of what we're discussing is the very tragic killing of Michael Brown Jr. And so we take a moment to remember him, to honor his family, his loved ones, all those who miss him so dearly each and every day. And to the many people, not only around St. Louis, but around the country and world who have joined hands and hearts and put feet to the street, put pen to paper, walked the halls of Congress, have done all kinds of things to say no more. We do not want his death or the many deaths like him to be in vain, and we want to do what we can to prevent this from happening to anybody else. And so it's in that spirit of just reverence and humility and deep honor that we enter not only this work, but this conversation tonight. And so when Chalice Press invited me back in 2014 to write about clergy involvement in Ferguson, I was so blessed to be able to talk to dozens of faith leaders, young activists throughout the St. Louis area who were actively engaged in the movement for racial justice in Ferguson and beyond, to not only hear what they did, but how they understood this work as an expression of their faith. Yes, it was a good and right and just thing to do, but even more than that, they took to the streets, they put their bodies on the line, they put themselves in the way because we believe that this is what God calls us to do, that God calls us to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And that's not a passive position, but rather in multitude ways to actively engage in this work. And so out of that came many of the stories that some of you may have read in the first book, Ferguson and Faith, where we heard about not only, again, the what they did, but why they did this and how it was connected to their faith. I was blessed when Chalice Press said, hey, would you like to write a follow-up? So I was able to go back to St. Louis. I live in Indianapolis now. I'm the dean at Christian Theological Seminary, and talk with many of the same faith leaders, invite some new ones in to find out what's happened since then, how things have evolved in their lives. So many things have happened in many of faith leaders' lives since 2014, and are just working and functioning in all kinds of ways, both in St. Louis and around the country for the purpose of racial justice. So to bring those stories kind of up to, up and through today, and also to move beyond what was happening in Ferguson. Because ladies and gentlemen, I just have to be honest, I could not overlook what has happened in this country over the past 5 years with the election of the previous president, who consistently and persistently used words that were degrading, demeaning, dishonoring of so many kinds of people, and in essence were violent. So to be able to kind of acknowledge, what that has been over these past 5 years, but also to make note of in a timeline that I have, I put in the new book, Faith After Ferguson, of unfortunately many, many, many more Black men, women, and children who have been killed at the hands of those who are sworn to serve and protect us. And also documenting other instances that were very problematic, such as the Tiki Torch March on the campus of the University of Virginia, the massacre at the Mother Bethel Church in South Carolina, the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. All these things come together to remind us that we cannot look away. We cannot pretend that these things don't matter and that, that's just the way it is. No, the way things are not the way things have to be. So it's my hope that through these kinds of discussions, through books like Faith After Ferguson and Ferguson and Faith, and so many other wonderful books that have been written, that we together can muster up the courage to say, no more, I'm in, let's go. And tonight it's my pleasure to introduce to some and welcome to others who know them so well, 3 dynamite leaders in the St. Louis area who long before the tragic events of August 9th, 2014, have been doing the work of seeking to join God's transforming work of the world in the academy, in the Juvenile Justice Center, in working with youth in all kinds of ways. So it is my pleasure tonight to welcome the Reverend Dr. Dietrich Baker, Demarco Davidson, and President Deb Krause. So the Reverend Dr. Dietrich Wise Baker is a visiting professor of community engagement and the director of contextual education at Eden Theological Seminary there in St. Louis. Dr. Baker is the lead organizer for Metropolitan Congregations United's Break the Pipeline campaign, aiming to dismantle the school to prison pipeline in Missouri. She is a certified anti-racism trainer for the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and a trainer of faith-based community organizing in the Gamaliel Network. She earned her Bachelor's of Science from Howard University, her Master of Divinity from Eden Theological Seminary, and her Doctor of Ministry in Preaching, because she's quite a preacher, from Aquinas Institute of Theology there in St. Louis. She's married to Cornell Baker. She is the mom of the magnificent Deuce Cornell Baker II and their lovely daughter, Alexis. Let's give a warm welcome to Dietrich. Thank you for being here. We are also pleased to welcome Demarco Davidson. Now, Demarco has been spent so much of his life, adult life, doing organizing work in education with young people, youth development, and community organizing. For those who know Demarco, I don't know if you know that he has a Bachelor of Science degree in industrial engineering from the University of Missouri at Rolla, and has long been putting those analytical skills to work for the building of a better world, more just and equitable for us all. He too is working on the pipeline issues with Metropolitan Congregations United, and continues the work of voter engagement with them as well. Demarco is the executive director for the Michael Brown Sr. Chosen for Change Foundation, and he also ran for Congress. I hope he'll talk a little bit about that tonight too. And so we are just delighted and blessed to have Demarco. Let's welcome Demarco. Thank you for being with us. And last but definitely not least, the Reverend Dr. Deborah Krause is the president of Eden Theological Seminary. Deb became the president of Eden in July of 2020 after serving a distinguished tenure as dean there. Deb is well known throughout the St. Louis area as not only a prolific scholar of New Testament, but also an activist who has sought to bring the work of doing justice both into the streets as well as into the classroom in very transformative ways. We are so grateful for the many ways that she has sought to push open the boundaries and really led the way in theological education and beyond for how doing the work of justice and being the church go hand in hand. She and several other colleagues did some remarkable things when the Presbyterian Church had their General Assembly in St. Louis a few years ago. And I hope she'll talk about that. That has shifted, it has shifted the denomination in a tremendous, tremendous way. And so we are grateful for her leadership. She is a graduate of Amherst College. That's where she earned her bachelor's degree. She earned her MDiv from Eden Seminary, her PhD from Emory, And we are just so very grateful for her leadership, which is both prophetic, pastoral, passionate, as are all three of them. So let's welcome Deb. Thank you. All right, well, we'll jump into it. One of the things that has been said about St. Louis since the Ferguson uprising is that St. Louis has become an organizing city. Dietrich, would you agree with that? What are your thoughts about that?
I think the truth actually is that St. Louis was an organizing city. Part of, I think, what happened in the movement, I mean, there's definitely more people organizing now than before, but I think part of what happened is that there were long established groups here that had been organizing, MCU, Metropolitan Congregations United being one of them, the Organization for Black Struggle, which had been organizing for decades in St. Louis, and many others that had been on the ground and doing organizing work for decades in this region.
And so with that network that existed, had you seen some of the ways in which perhaps that work has been expanded since the Ferguson uprising? Demarco, have you seen how in what ways has that work grown?
Yes. So first off, thank you for allowing me to be here, and I truly appreciate it. Then thank you for allowing me to participate in the book as well. And I share people all the time because of the amazing professors at Eden and so many others in the community, and specifically Reverend Dr. Leah Gunning Francis, probably saved my life in my first semester, my first year in seminary, because that was the first year of the Ferguson uprising after Mike Brown was murdered. So yes, I definitely think that things have grown and continue to grow. When we look at how many organizations were started, not just in throughout the city, but I actually, because I'm slightly young enough still, I actually can communicate and engage with younger people. So just seeing some of the organizations that were developed on college campuses, some of the C high schools actually get organized in some capacity or another, and continue to participate and engage in different elements to see that when there is a tragedy, a lot of times we see a lot of adults jump in, but this time, like I think, and again, I'm just observing, and as I think about me being part of what we call the Columbine Generation, Columbine happened in 1998, 99, when I was graduating from high school. My friends and I didn't organize an organization and start demanding gun justice or more gun laws, things like that. Like, we didn't do that, but the students from Parkland did come to Ferguson. It's featured in the book as well. That's why I'm bringing it up. And they started Students Demand Action along with Moms Demand Action. So when we see elements like that happening across St. Louis, across the state, and across the country, I think it definitely has a profound effect on how we actually organize now, and more people. I think like the on-ramp, the ability to get involved with organizations seems to be still challenging. It's never easy. But definitely accessible for those who do desire to organize.
Yeah, that is definitely a good thing. Good thing. Deb, how about you? What have you seen with that?
Well, I mean, I'm quite a bit older than any of y'all. And as a kiddo growing up, I happened to grow up in St. Louis. I remember the work of the great Percy Green and the organizing of that generation around the construction of the arch. People were challenging for greater equity and in African-American ability to attain employment in doing that, workers organizing, and desegregation, not only of municipal spaces, but also churches. So bringing pressure on congregations to really think about what it means to be a person of faith in relationship to racial justice. So I think St. Louis has been a place where that, as Dietrich and Demarco have shared, of real organizing and intention around that. As Walter Johnson has called it, the broken heart of America, right? So here we are, and and we're blessed by these legacies of those who have been in the struggle for a while.
And have continued to build on that in some really important and remarkable ways. And, as has already been said, we see this happening around the country now in ways that, had not been seen as visibly. As we said, there have always been organizing going on, but the ways that it's now been visible, it's hasn't been seen in quite a while. It's so often I would hear sometimes people say, well, this isn't, your mom's civil rights movement. And I'm like, well, actually, in some ways, it's very similar. And let's talk about that. Like when we think about the civil rights movement, if it had not been for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Freedom Riders on the bus rides, a lot of young people. And in these movements, we've seen a lot of young people really take to the front, stand, claim their space, use their voices, extend their power to say, no, we're not moving until we see some change. And so to see that blossom in a way that it has, today and be in the forefront is definitely something, that many have attributed to the Ferguson uprising and the courage and the holy boldness that was shown for so long, for such a sustained period, has really lit the fire of many. I've said there have been many that have, lit their wicks from the fire of Ferguson to carry on the torch of justice. And that I think is a good thing. But with that, I'm also curious to know, are there some things that you had hoped would have perhaps either changed or come about as a result of the Ferguson movement? Dietrich, how about you?
Oh, God's shalom would come. Yeah. We're preachers and ministers. We're pretty lofty, but I don't think we were the only ones who, had planned and hoped that it would all be torn down and that it would stay down. I struggle with always just being real, incremental change, and the ways in which we have to fight, tooth by tooth, nail by nail, to win and to make progress. In areas with just like the police, let's just take the police. Let's just take that trajectory and what we've been able to move in our own community. I mean, I would say in a lot of ways, it is an uphill battle and fight on today, in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we see that nationwide, right? Like it's not just a St. Louis matter, but I know for me personally, I thought that after what happened to Michael Brown in Ferguson and the response, that we would really see a change in policing protocols, in standards, use of force, de-escalation. And yet after that, we did not. Actually, we ended up seeing more cases around the country. And so that's been pretty tough. Deb, how about you? What do you think?
I mean, that phrase that Dietrich just used, incrementalism, and thinking about that institutional change, whether it be public safety and how that's institutionalized, to the courts, to an institution like a theological school or a church. I mean, just thinking about institutional change and how incremental it is, and thinking about that theologically. I guess Dr. King called it the long arc, and bending toward justice. But that's a a weary road, right? Especially when so much is on the line all the time, every day. And we see, as you've been saying, evidence of that, particularly in public safety and policing, and how thinking at a school like Eden, how things have changed around our curriculum, how we understand what it means to be church has been deeply informed by Ferguson. And Leah, you were here when we were creating a new curriculum, and Ferguson really informed that process, because it began, I think we began that curriculum revision in 2012 or 2011 or something, and we finished it in 2016. We planned to be done in 2014. But that the curricular change where what, as you so beautifully named it, the young people were doing in the streets convicted the faculty and the institution to rethink what it means to be religious leaders, and really did inform how we shaped the curriculum. You were professor of contextual education at the time, as we were reshaping the seminars to do that. And now Dietrich is professor of contextual education as we continue that work. And it really has been engaged with organizing and this understanding of being in a network rather than operating as sort of siloed congregations, or understanding ministry as tending that in some way, but really engaging in a network of people in the community who are working for this kind of transformation. And that too is slow, and that engages with the church slowly, but this is the work to which we're called.
It is. And, I remember one time you said something to the effect of, we don't need to think of ourselves that, where the light goes on, but there's actually light happening out here that we need to go and join with, right? Is that, yes, that, that we can form these networks. We don't have to think that it just needs to be our church, our school, our organization, but there is a whole network of people out here. So it's about going and finding alignment and being able to engage in some meaningful ways with others. That is great. Demarco, how about you? Anything you wish you were hopeful had changed?
Yes, definitely. So I know I see a few familiar faces on here, so I'm sure some of them have heard me share a few things before, but there's a lot of people I don't know. So one of the things I'll share with people on a regular basis is how much I'm just utterly disgusted and disturbed and stay righteously angered by how the seeds of incremental change are watered with the blood of Black, brown, and poor people. And unfortunately, it takes something so traumatic, so tragic for people to actually say, oh, we got to do something different. It took us having to see a snuff film in the midst of a pandemic for people to really even start saying Black Lives Matter, but now it's almost a commercialized slogan now. And when I say this, I'm talking about the murder of George Floyd, that he was killed slowly. Like, we had to watch that, and it had to be during the pandemic. So there were no sports to distract us with. So it took that along with the pandemic, along with a narcissistic president. It took all that for people to realize, oh wait, that's a problem. And sometimes when those type of things have to be so big, so gargantuan, then it is tougher to focus on the Ferguson Police Department or the St. Louis City Police Department, who, I don't know about now, but at the time frame in 2014, 16 area, St. Louis City was the #1 police department with the most officer-involved shootings and killings per capita in the nation. So those type of things get overlooked because we get focused on the biggest issue. So that's just, and that still happens to this day. I'm so excited and so glad that those officers involved in George Floyd got prosecuted. But when I think of Breonna Taylor, and when I think of how those officers, they got prosecuted too, but they got prosecuted or charged for the bullets that went through walls, not for the bullets and the killing of Breonna Taylor. Right. So we are so far away from actually police accountability, for example. And also recognizing, because I do some history and I'm still learning myself, that trying to connect the dots on how these things happen and how long they've been happening. And it's sometimes I think that's overwhelming as well. And so with that being said, one of the things that I did wish also, and I see it starting to happen some more, but I think of one of the chants that we would say on a regular whenever there was a civil disobedience or a protest specifically, and in places where people were driving, and we would say out of the cars into the streets. I wish we had a chance to go around in certain communities and neighborhoods and say out of the church into the streets. And again, it took a pandemic for people to say or to think about church outside of the four walls of a church or of a congregation. It took that to happen. So I wish there was more congregational involvement, or I wish there were congregations that were focused on understanding, but then really taking action towards being on the side of bending that long arc towards justice. It doesn't bend by itself. We need way more people to put pressure on this long arc towards justice. So that's what I would definitely wish that we saw more of. I do appreciate different, not just Eden Seminary, but so many other seminaries. I do appreciate the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference that is also leading the way, that I think has gotten stronger over the years. Even during the pandemic, they still able to do so virtually, and so many other organizations and on a theological standpoint. And so I'm excited, and I do find hope and faith in that as well. So those are some things I wish that were better and were different, but I'm also seeing the hope that we actually are developing and organizing together.
And those are great examples of that, but at the same time, recognizing the need that we still have miles to go. So Demarco, you ran for Congress, correct?
Yes.
Tell us a bit about what sparked that. So we mentioned earlier that people have done lots of different kinds of things since involvement with the movement and beyond. And one of those is you running for Congress. Share just a little bit about that. What motivated you to do that?
Definitely. So first I'm going to say, make sure for those who haven't had a copy of the book already, make sure you get a copy of the book, because a piece of the story is in there. But I know I've actually read my part, so I know what's left out, so I can give it out an exclusive for tonight. So I decided to run for Congress it started because I was taking a class at Eden on violence. Like, we had a class on violence it was an intensive, which means it was only 3 weeks. So, and I shared with so many others that I hope and wish that if they ever have this class taught again, make sure that we have some spiritual counselors prepared. Like, we gonna need Minister Priest there as well, because it was a trip. Like, we unpacked violence, and what I did was unpack gun violence. I unpacked gun violence for multiple reasons, from not just having multiple friends, family members who had been killed, but including my dad, who had been murdered in 2015 by a 19-year-old with a gun. So I started researching and started connecting certain dots, looking at how did we get here? How did St. Louis specifically become this murder capital of America? And I'll usually start and stop with leadership. Who are the leaders? What are they saying? What are they suggesting? So in the midst of me deciding to run, it also was right after 2016. I saw how the candidates for US president were discussing issues, and one candidate, this is just my opinion, provided no hope. The other candidate provided false hope. And I was like, wait a minute, people are going to go with false hope over no hope. So I was like, that got to change too. So not only that, to me, I think there would need to be a national resetting on how are we discussing solving issues and problems. But we also, when I looked at St. Louis, like, who's responsible for this? And I looked at a lot of the issues really started started manifesting, I should say, started showing and revealing themselves 20 years ago. So I was like, wait a minute, what changed then? And I saw it was because a particular person became congressperson. And what was the difference? And so first, just like any good organizer, we always try to figure out who's impacted and have one-on-ones with people. And I really did try to find somebody else to run for office. I wasn't trying to run myself. But when I asked certain individuals who I felt could do a way better job than me, they didn't want to run for multiple reasons. So I said, if it is to be, it's up to me. So I sought out wise counsel. I counted the cost as the good book shares and suggests. So I decided to run for Congress. In the midst of me running, I decided to actually pull out of the race. And I had planned on just resetting, but I ended up getting offered an opportunity to work with Wesley Bell, or Attorney Wesley Bell, to run to become the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney to replace former prosecuting attorney Bob McCullough. And one of the reasons, again, it's not in the book, so I can share with y'all. One of the reasons why I was adamant or even excited to actually run for Congress, as well as, after I pull out of the race, work with Wesley Bell, in the midst of my father being killed, and in St. Louis County, my family had to engage with Bob McCullough, the prosecuting attorney. And I actually found out through different ways that Bob McCullough actually found out who I was. Bob McCullough found out that I was involved with the family of Mike Brown, found out that I was involved in protesting and organizing protests because of Ferguson and Mike Brown being murdered. And they appointed one of the, to me, again, in my opinion and my family's opinion, one of the worst attorneys. And again, when I looked at the leadership, we did not have anyone to hold Bob McCullough accountable, not any of the senators, no Congress people, not even the governor would not hold Bob McCullough. And everybody was a Democrat. So that's a whole nother ball of wax there. And I was like, that has to change. We need people who are actually going to support and fight and really engage and make sure that people are not being, make sure that justice is not running out just because somebody was actually fighting for justice for someone else. And so therefore, that's one reason why I ran. And when I pulled away, but even when I got the offer to be the deputy campaign manager for Wesley Bell, there was no doubt. I was like, sign me up because we got to get rid of him. And that's just been one of my mottos, that anyone who allows the attack or allows the targeting or the destruction of Black boys and Black girls, and I let people know we coming for them. Like any candidate, any politician, any pastor. If anybody allowed the destruction of Black boys and girls, brown boys and girls, LGBTQIA plus boys and girls, I just let people know we coming for them. So that's one of the reasons why I ran. That's why I still stay involved in engagement, because I truly believe that if we ourselves cannot become the candidates or become the person in office to change the policies, we got to change the policies. So either we changing the policies or changing the people who change the policies.
And, that's a great example of that, Demarco, is this sort of finding the leader within. So often throughout the movements, we've heard people say, well, where's the leader? There's no organization. Where's the modern day Dr. King? Who's in charge here? And I would say in response to that, lift your head up and look around. People are finding the leader within. They're not just sitting waiting for somebody to say, oh, you have to go this way or you have to go that way, but rather mustering the courage to step up, stand up, step up, speak up, and say, no, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to run for office. We're going to seek to change the policies. We're going to have our say. So that's a really, really, I thought, just a really powerful example of that, Demarco, and we definitely applaud those efforts. Dietrich, you have been involved in so many things related to organizing, but one of the things that you did for quite a while was work with the juvenile justice system, correct? And I am interested to hear just a bit of your reflection, as we're thinking about, because I want to also kind of have an opportunity to talk a bit about, what are some of the things we need to do now? We've talked about a bit about what's happened, what we wish had happened, but also what are some of the things we need to do now? And I'm just interested to hear that a bit, especially as you reflect some on that really, really critical work that you've done.
Yeah, I spent 15 years as a juvenile chaplain in, probably every, juvenile facility in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. I think one of the lessons or the call from God was really about learning about systems, benevolent systems in the sense, or systems that intend to be benevolent, or hold that up as their models. And so this is sort of where, Break the Pipeline came from is, there's a series of systems, including policing, that hold themselves up as, as benevolent systems. I would call that education, I call that policing. And then of course, the juvenile court's whole purpose is to be rehabilitative, to keep kids from going to prison. But just because that's what you want to do doesn't mean that's what you actually doing. And so I mean, I think one of that was one of the big learnings, is that the intention to be benevolent by a system without the accountability of the community, benevolent systems really can get a serious pass, and I include schools and policing and juvenile courts in that number, where the community is not watching, the community is not looking, and all kinds of things happen that should not happen to children and families in benevolent systems. And I probably would include, if I talk that broadly, to not what I would call a nonprofit industrial complex, to social service agencies that are rooted really in white supremacy, and white supremacy is operating in those systems, and not to the good of brown and Black people, youth, and families. So as I think about going forward, I think the other piece that I'm starting to see is also what's happening to the movement. And I was talking to some other organizers about this. I mean, who owns the movement? And, sort of to Demarco's sort of point, I mean, in terms of the cash flow and the money that flows into the movement, and I mean the movement, the grassroots movement for Black lives, and all of the different movements that are working for justice. When you look at the source of those funds and who has their hand on the movement, there's still a lot of power that I think is rooted in folks that can co-opt the movement and direct the movement, that we would not want to have it. And so, I think there's a danger of the movement being co-opted, being commercialized. I think Demarco said it, commercialized. I think that's something that we got to watch on and work with. But I think that means a lot more people have to be involved. So that we are funding the movement, and we are the ones who seed the movement, and not forces that ultimately don't intend to serve the people and serve the community. And the last thing I'll say is just related to, campaigns and the infrastructure to actually build power in the community. A lot of that money and resources kind of goes to political campaigns, like, the millions and millions of dollars, right, that are spent on these campaigns. Like, we were in Jennings on doors for 6 months. What could we have done if someone gave our campaign $1 million to build infrastructure in a community where people have been voiceless and people don't really know how to organize themselves per se, and how to engage in the political power in their community. And so what I'm seeing as an organizer is that we've invested resources and money in the infrastructure for political campaigns, maybe for national issue campaigns, but the next investment has to be in local communities and people that are directly impacted by the issues. And the movement, I think, rhetorically has made that shift, but the money has not made that shift.
And that's an essential element of that. Deb, you called on the Presbyterian Church to make a significant investment. Can you share a bit about that, for what happened and how there was no activist tourism when they came to, the General Assembly came to St. Louis, was it 2018? And as opposed to that, really sought to address a local issue right there, as well as put some money into it.
Well, I'd be happy to think about that. I want to pick up the threads from Demarco and Dietrich about this kind of concern about benevolent systems, because I think in some way what the agitation that happened here in St. Louis among some Presbyterian leaders and activists as the GA came was about challenging the benevolent systems within the Presbyterian Church.
Right.
How it came
Right.
to St. Louis, wanting to kind of engage in what was going on with Ferguson and to connect with that and to see what was happening. And there had been quite a bit of that, tourism coming to St. Louis to connect with the movement. And that happened through churches and theological schools. I mean, and it was understandable. People wanted to connect with the uprising and to learn from it. And that's a good thing. But it's also, I think, that kind of tension of wanting to challenge people to understand that there's plenty of challenges that are happening here in St. Louis that are happening across the country, right? So the idea of coming here to connect with that always seemed a little strange. So the opportunity to work with the leadership of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, and this is our big every 2-year meeting in the church that happens in some major city across the United States. And so it happened to be in St. Louis. And I really was not a lead organizer on this. It was a current Eden Doctor of Ministry student who was a relatively new pastor to St. Louis at the time. And this is who I really talk about in your interview with me in this volume. Reverend Aaron Cunahan, who's in Eden's Doctor of Ministry program now. And Aaron has since moved to DC, but she was serving Oak Hill Presbyterian Church and had become the moderator of the Presbytery here in St. Louis. And really had, through the Stockley uprising, connected with the kind of organizing for social justice and racial justice in St. Louis, and through MCU had become very involved, and was really becoming, I think, brought a social work background and a understanding of organizing with her into ministry, but was also growing in that way in her work here, and just did a pretty textbook job of agitating the leadership of the GA as they came in with their sort of model of a charitable approach to mission here in St. Louis. And I can talk about this freely because they really moved in an exemplary way. They listened to those of us who were challenging them. They wanted to do a kind of Habitat for Humanity house and do a hands-on kind of event around GA. And we were like, look, there's a lot that's happening here in St. Louis for you to connect with. Why don't you listen to local social justice leaders and organizers to kind of see what the issues are? And they did. And through that, moved into connecting with the work that was being done around the workhouse here in St. Louis, medium security prison, to close the workhouse, and the national campaign to end cash bail, and became, and with Aaron and other organizers in St. Louis, really engaged that multi-thousand member meeting. Ended up coming out into the street and marching against cash bail, and the moderator of the Presbyterian Church spoke against the system of cash bail, and from the vantage point of Christian faith. And it was really a powerful witness, and it was, I think, an example of what can happen as the church hears the not only the call for social justice and is willing to reform and open up its own practices and patterns, but is also willing to engage with organizers and activists and people who are in the midst of the struggle, and bring that gift of that perspective that the church has done a fairly good job insulating itself from. So I thought that was just a really wonderful example of that, the intersection of organizing, community, faith-based community organizing, and denominational life.
I think so too. And they took that back to Louisville, correct? So
Yes,
I
they
know
did.
that Alton Pollard at Louisville Press has been engaged. You know, it's gone. It did what I know you all hoped it would do, in part, that this is not just a St. Louis issue. You know, these issues are present and prevalent all over this country, in cities and towns. And so to be able to kind of build that kind of infrastructure and make those kind of investments right where you are is crucial.
Right, and to see the membership of the church as a resource to be organized for
Yes.
social change, right?
Yes.
And social justice and racial justice in this case. And I think that was, I think, an awakening for how the church can be thinking of itself that way.
Yes, there was a question in the chat about what you all have seen and how responsive have church members, people who worship in houses of worship, how responsive they've been to appeals to get involved in racial justice work. How's that? Have you seen in St. Louis, Dietrich, did you see, how's that, whether it's related to the sacred conversations on race, you know, how's that response been over these past few years?
I mean, I think there was definitely a shift. I mean, you know, not only here, but across the country, in terms of everyone, including church folks, ear and wanting to have a conversation and do something. I think there's definitely been a shift. There's definitely an energy around the issue of racial justice. And I think, you know, you're gonna, and there's an opposing energy around that too, that I think is forming to match the energy that has been noticed about, you know, congregational folks and people in the country, period. And oh my God, it's so hard. Oh my God, it's so hard. You know, as an anti-racism trainer, going into congregations or communities doing this work. I mean, it's exhausting and hard. It's really hard, and especially right now with everything else that folks are dealing with. So that's what I would say quickly.
And acknowledging that. And so for those who are listening and are part of faith communities, you know, we really have a ways to go with getting people involved and even talking about these things in ways that can lead to corresponding action. That work we all have to get involved with. There's another question that states, the St. Louis region just received more than $500 million from a lawsuit related to the departure of the former St. Louis Rams. How do you think that could be put to the most effective use to address racial justice in the metro area? I'll let any of the three of you answer who would like to answer that.
I actually want to really piggyback real quick on the last question, and I'll do my best to answer that one. Because one, that's news to me, so I need to take time to process that. But you know, when Ferguson, the Ferguson uprising was happening, I definitely want to just commend and give shouts out to people who were seen as who were already seen as spiritual or religious people already doing work in the community, and then some of their work did get recognized. And I'm thinking specifically of like Leanne Yang, who used to go by Karen Yang, from Eden, that was already doing work around Asian Americans and justice and things of that nature. Thinking of Minister Cori Bush, who did run for Congress, who did unseat the previous Congressperson. So I'm thinking of like people like that. I'm thinking of Reverend Michelle Higgins, who also participated at that event. But then I'm also thinking of people who definitely brought us a element of church, of congregational organizing and healing in the streets. And I'm thinking of like people like Kayla Reed and Brittany Farrell and Montega Simmons, Tefpo. So I mean, so many others. So that's one thing also that sometimes that does get highlighted, and sometimes we miss that. But with that being said, I as somebody who organized congregations now, it still falls heavy onto a pastor to really move a church. And if that pastor is not aware or engaged, or like, the church is not going to do too much either. So, you know, and I appreciate people like Reverend Dr. Dietrich Baker, who is literally training and teaching organizing at a seminary. And as I always share, there are seminaries here in St. Louis who never mentioned the word Ferguson from 2014 and not even till now. There are seminaries who are training pastors who don't even mention Ferguson in any shape, form, or fashion. So that's why, again, I just really lift up Eden and appreciate at one point in time Professor Deb Cross to now President, Madam President Deb Cross of Eden Seminary. So when I think of when it comes to being able to articulate or be able to say where the funding should be used, one, I'm happy to say that again, many people that's featured in the book also participated in some shape, form, or fashion in the development or in the election of the current mayor of St. Louis City. That didn't happen by luck, and it took a lot of people. It literally took us having to change the way voting happens in St. Louis City for that to occur. And that started in different ways, and even I was involved in that a little bit, but way more people had way more involvement in that than I did. Plus, I didn't get a chance to vote. I didn't live in St. Louis City. So it took hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people to even make that happen. And now that we do have somebody who is focused, we have a mayor who is adamant about community development or making sure that there are funds that can be contributed towards the development. Whenever we have a project come in, how does this impact the community? What are they doing to build a community around them? We have a mayor who has at least verbalized that, and there are people who can hold that mayor accountable as well. With that being said, I have no idea who's actually going to be able to hold after the mayor. I don't know who can hold anybody else accountable, especially when it comes to dealing with Kroenke and Kroenke Connect to Walmart, the Walton family, and knowing that we about to have a new soccer stadium, and the St. Louis City didn't even St. Louis City didn't have that much to do with the soccer stadium for real. Like, it's just, the NGA, it's a lot. And I think that's where we still struggle, because whatever the development may come, and this is one thing I share people to be mindful of what we consider to be progress. Sometimes when we think of progress, communities get wiped out. Specifically, Black, brown, poor communities end up getting wiped out. So I hope, my prayers, and I will be looking for, I'm willing to bet actually St. Louis will definitely be working towards, I'm pretty sure MCU, I'm pretty sure Jobs with Justice with Reverend Teresa McDaniel, Reverend Teresa Danley will be involved in making sure that that not just us that we are at the table, making sure that clergy are at the table, making sure that community stakeholders are at the table to actually lead and be involved in those discussions, because we definitely need it. And I'll probably close with this. One of the things that I have come to a realization now, and because for me, the conversations that Reverend Jackie Tyler and I used to have, there's a difference in congregations. I organize Black, white congregations, city, county congregations. Some congregations, they got endowment funds, and that's great. So they can do a lot of work. Some congregations have to lock up their parking lots. So when we think about the doors of the church being open, what does that say when a church has to lock up their parking lot because that church isn't safe from the community that it resides in? And although the church might be doing everything that it possibly can, it still has to understand there's an element where the community that doesn't have the same type of respect that churches used to have back in the day. People never thought of breaking into a church at one point in time. Our church was personally vandalized twice. We also think that it was because we were also the church that was saying Black Lives Matter, and also the first convening place of the National Black Lives Matter as well. We think it's more of that stuff versus like just some neighborhood stuff. But like we recognize that there are a lot of hurdles that a lot of congregations are fighting to get over, and some of them are doing well, other ones are not. And church, the fact that again the pandemic closed a lot of doors in some of the congregations that we had worked with just in the past year. So we definitely praying for those and looking forward to how we can strengthen congregations so we can strengthen communities, and hopefully that strengthening the congregation also strengthen people's and the parishioners' faith, strengthening their faith towards justice.
Exactly. Amen to that. Amen. Well, we are nearing the end of our time today. And as we prepare to close out this evening, Demarco, thank you for that. I want to give Deb and Dietrich just another minute for any final closing as you're thinking about those who are joining us this evening and where we go from here, whether it be as congregations, individuals, persons in various organizations, schools, wherever you want to take it. Deb, how about you?
Well, I just want to encourage everyone that the stories in this book and the previous volume really tell a story of leaders of churches and members of churches, people of faith, being enriched in their faith by getting more and more engaged in their communities for social justice. And that as we face all of the challenges that Demarco just outlined so powerfully around shifts that are happening in our culture around the church, and now that we've all had this challenge with the COVID, these 2 years going through COVID, that it's been a real stress. And I think the lane is still wide open, that the provision of God for the work we're called to do is in our communities. And if you need a source of inspiration for that, and where the Spirit and how the Spirit is moving, this book and the prior volume are a great source of inspiration for that. So thank you, Leah, and thank you, Chalice, for this gift.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you for that and for all of your leadership. Thank you. Dietrich, excuse me. Dietrich?
I mean, I feel like I want to answer that last question. I'm hopeful for the tearing down and the building up of new communities that serve the people of God, wherever they may be, and however they name themselves. And I think that's a real local project that has state and national implications. And so, I just say, to the group, start where you are and look for ways to change your proximity to the community and to those who are directly impacted by the issues that are confounding the church and the community.
Amen to that. Amen. Reverend Dr. Dietrich Wise Baker, Mr. Demarco Davidson, President Deb Krause, we give you a great big hand, finger snaps, however you choose to show appreciation to them, please do so. Thank you all so very much for sharing your powerful, powerful, powerful perspectives that are both prophetic, pastoral, and deeply passionate. Thank you all so much. Brad, I'll turn this back over to you.
Oh, and thank you also, Leah. Again, Deb and Dietrich and Demarco and Leah, thank you all for your time and insight. This is a conversation that could go much, much longer and needs to be continuing in the years to come. And so there's so much change still to be done here in St. Louis, but we are grateful that we have such visionaries here to help lead us through it. We're grateful that all of you have chosen to spend this Monday evening with us, and we hope that you'll enjoy your copy of Faith After Ferguson. If you don't already have a copy of Ferguson and Faith, you can get both of these at chalicepress.com or wherever you choose to buy your books. I will say that when you buy it from chalicepress.com, it means twice as much to both Leah and to our nonprofit corporation. So we're grateful for however you choose to show your support for our work. Again, thank you to our panelists tonight. And we are so grateful for your time, your insight, and your passion around this issue. And thank you all to our viewers for doing what you can to help change the world one book at a time. Have a great evening, everybody, and good night.
Bye-bye.